Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Srebrenica, Sarajevo, and war crimes in the former Yugoslavia back in the news after Ratko Mladic is finally found.
Danas tokom jutarnjih sati uhapšen Ratko Mladic.
DSK and the media, the cultural news divide between France and the U.S. over the case of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, Iran and its plan to shrink the World Wide Web, and London calling with dubstep, our web video of the week. The arrest of the alleged war criminal Ratko Mladic in Serbia brought the former Yugoslavia back into the news headlines and had photo editors combing their archives for images that haunted Europe for much of the 1990s. It also revived some datelines dormant in our memories, places like Srebrenica. The former Bosnian Serb general was one of the world's most wanted men, but his arrest has provoked Serbia's critics to theorize that the timing had more to do with the country's application for membership in the European Union than the government's abiding sense of justice. And many of the same questions the government is facing could well be asked of the country's media, which seemed no more eager to find Mladic than the authorities were. And how have the Bosnian media, based in Sarajevo, a city that was besieged by forces under Mladic's command, been treating the story? Our starting point this week is the tiny Serbian village of Lazarevo, the end of a 16-year-long manhunt that never really was, and the lingering questions, starting with, what took you so long?
Najtraženiji haški begunac, Ratko Mladic, uhapšen je u selu Lazarevo kod Zrenjanina.
16 years after Mladic's indictment, he has finally been arrested.
When the news broke, it was sensational. Nobody had expected it.
The reaction to that arrest of Mladic has been absolutely enormous.
He lived pretty much openly until about 2000, 2001. And after that, he was protected by various networks, at least until 2008.
The media weren't interested in trying to search for him. There was no public pressure on the media to investigate the whereabouts of General Mladic.
In the news business, genocide is not a word to be used loosely, but that's what happened in Srebrenica in 1995. 8,000 Bosnian Muslims, men and boys, killed by Bosnian Serb forces commanded by Ratko Mladic. And even if the government in Belgrade had political reasons to avoid arresting Mladic for so long, where were the Serb media on this story? Where were the journalists?
I don't think the problem was ever with journalists. I think the problem was always with who's in control of the media and what's the political bias of the media and how free is the media. The problem is how far is your company, your newspaper, your TV station prepared to go?
The answer, in the case of Serbia and the hunt for the general, is not very far at all.
The media in Serbia are very close to power. Many outlets are directly controlled by government or state organs, and those which are privately owned also are very close to the authorities. The government didn't want Mladic to be found, and the people who control the media in Serbia would know that. They would know where to stop. They would know what not to look at.
Certainly, he did have his supporters, within the media, within the government at the time, during the 90s, early 2000s. And the Serbian media had sort of a very strange relationship with the war anyway.
There was a sort of a collective denial of committing war crimes. The same way you had people in media who thought the same thing, that Mladic was basically somebody who was more of a war hero of Serbs in Bosnia than somebody who committed war crimes.
There is a cult of the Serbian military in Serbia, and it was very easy for the media to celebrate this figure, filmed peering usually across vast landscapes of mountains and forests, saying something to his aides around him who would be looking at him normally with a sort of veneration in their eyes.
Just last month, Serbia's state-owned TV channel issued an apology for the propaganda it spewed in the 90s on behalf of Slobodan Milosevic's government and Mladic's forces. In those days, Serbian politicians and their media were obsessed with Bosnia. Now the focus is on Brussels, and Serbia's application for EU membership.
RTS was an absolute disgrace from the late 1980s until, well, throughout the period of the war and afterwards. So is that admission worth very much? Well, I suppose you could say better late than never. Why now? You need to look at this context of the Tadic government trying to move towards trying to win positive assessments from Brussels. So I think that's the context in which you need to skeptically assess this fessing up by RTS.
They preserved this image of Mladic and his contemporaries as heroes. I think as the democratic changes started to occur, they would report once in a while, well, there is this search for Mladic, and they would try to distance themselves from any kind of a polemical debate. But at the same time, that sort of undertone of nationalism and conservatism was always sort of apparent.
And when the Mladic arrest was finally made, the Serbian media were not even the first to break the story.
The news came out basically from Croatia to Serbia. First newspaper that had news on Mladic's arrest was basically one Croatian newspaper, Jutarnji List, which had it on their website. So basically then it spread, and it was really a big story.
The Bosnian media have not been as quiet on the Mladic story as the Serbian media. In 2009, one channel, Federation TV, broadcast footage that it said showed the fugitive living quite unlike a fugitive.
And the point that they were trying to make was that Mladic was living openly and that the Serbian authorities weren't going after him. The Serbian authorities disputed this because they said it was incredibly old footage from pre-2000. Therefore, the political point that Federation TV was trying to score was just as it wasn't a point because it was very old, but they claimed that it was new.
Media tend to reflect the societies they cover. That is true of the countries that once made up Yugoslavia. That includes Bosnia, as well as the country at the heart of the Mladic story, Serbia.
If you were to go to Belgrade now, and if you were to take in the whole range of news sources, you would be impressed by the appearance of political pluralism. But if you scratch the surface, you get to governmental connections or governmental control. And that's why the story of the whereabouts of Ratko Mladic could be a non-story for so long.
And as for that old myth reinforced by images and stories in the Serbian media in the 90s of the nation-building war hero, it's a different picture today.
The expectations were different. You were looking to arrest hero, and then you arrest one old sick man. And then you had it in media. His first demand was to get some strawberries to eat. And this kind of stuff, everything looked in a way bizarre, pathetic, strange. And at the end, most of Serbs really, after watching this on media, started thinking, okay, let's send him as soon as possible to The Hague.
Our Global Village voice is now on the media side of the Ratko Mladic story.
The majority of Serbian media is still politicized and biased. Mainstream media, especially national television, has never presented Ratko Mladic as a war criminal. They have never reported what's exactly happened in Srebrenica, and never said to the public how terrible the massacre was.
There is strong belief that without Serbian media it would not be possible to ignite the confrontation and the aggression in early 1990s. They are treating things and events for which they are proven as responsible for, such as Srebrenica, as taboo. In the case of Mladic, from the beginning of the chase after him, they were only used as a service to forward political statements such as "we don't have him" or "we don't know where he is."
Ratko Mladic and Srebrenica massacre have never been taboo in Serbia. It's one of most exploited topics in this country, and something you can really write, really talk, or really read.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Pakistan is one of the deadliest places for journalists and media personnel to do their work. And the recent murder of Syed Salim Shahzad has highlighted those dangers. Shahzad had been missing for nearly 2 days when his body was discovered bearing signs of torture. He was the bureau chief of the Hong Kong-based Asia Times Online and had just published the first of a two-part report that said Al-Qaeda was behind the attack on a Pakistani naval base in Karachi. He also suggested in that piece that there were ties between Al-Qaeda and Pakistani naval officers. A representative of Human Rights Watch has said that he had spoken to the journalist who told him that he was under surveillance by Pakistani intelligence and that he was getting threatening phone calls. Although Pakistan has a relatively outspoken media, they rarely criticize the country's armed forces. Dozens of journalists covering anti-government protests in Georgia are saying they were beaten, arrested, and had their equipment taken away by security forces. Thousands of Georgians had taken to the streets of Tbilisi, the capital, demanding the departure of President Mikhail Saakashvili. A curfew was imposed, and when it passed, baton-wielding police moved in to clear the crowd, as well as the journalists covering them. Among the reporters who say they were victimized, Tamaz Kupreshvili and Kate Stalinsky, who both work for the online newspaper Net Gazeti. They said that they were beaten by police despite telling them that they were press. Anna Gabunya and Tengo Akujava, both from Express News Agency, said that they were arrested, had their equipment confiscated, and told not to cover opposition activity. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, there's a plan in the works in Tehran to replace the World Wide Web with the Iran Wide Web. Iran has a very politically active and opinionated blogosphere. Protesters there also pioneered the use of social media as a galvanizing political force after the disputed 2009 elections, which is why the country has some of the most advanced online censoring technology available. Now, Iranian authorities are reportedly working on a national internet that would effectively disconnect the country's online community from the rest of the world, allowing access only to government-approved sources and sites. Iran's head of economic affairs was quoted in that Wall Street Journal article as saying that it will be a genuinely halal network, meaning it's compliant with Islamic laws, and it will also prevent the invasion of Western ideas. Cuba already has a two-tiered internet, wide open for tourists and government officials, but limited for locals, and Myanmar and North Korea are both said to be heading in the same direction. It's been 3 months since he's been ousted from office, and the first place Egyptian justice is hitting former President Hosni Mubarak is in the pocketbook. An administrative court has just fined Mr. Mubarak and 2 senior officials in his government a total of $91 million for cutting the country's mobile phone and internet services during the protests there earlier this year. Mubarak will reportedly have to pay around $34 million of that fine for causing damage to the national economy. Like the other Arab uprisings, Egypt's was largely coordinated on social media sites like Twitter and Facebook, and the Mubarak regime shut down the internet and ordered mobile networks in the country to suspend their services. Last week, we told you that France 24's correspondent in Bahrain claimed that she had been arrested and abused in custody. Now a fuller account of her detention has been released. Naziha Saeed says she was summoned for questioning to a police station in the city of Riffa. After being taken to an interrogation room, Ms. Saeed claims she was accused of lying in her reports and told to admit her links with the Hezbollah TV station Al Manar, as well as with Iran's Arabic language channel Al Alam. She was then moved to another room where she says she was interrogated by police women, insulted, beaten, and degraded for hours before she was released. According to news reports, there are still dozens of journalists in jail in Bahrain, most of whom were arrested for their coverage of the protests that started in February. What condition they are in is anyone's guess. The incident took place not far from Wall Street and sent shockwaves through the global financial community as well as French political circles. And those images of the handcuffed former head of the International Monetary Fund, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, have precipitated a debate in the media. The man known as DSK became French finance minister in 1997, was put in charge of the IMF a decade later, and was the front-runner in France's upcoming presidential elections. DSK's reputation, he was nicknamed the Great Seducer, was an open secret amongst the French media corps covering him. However, the alleged case of sexual assault in New York has left some asking whether the binding impact of France's strict privacy laws and the French media's self-imposed code of conduct resulted in the underreporting of previous allegations that might have been a sign of things to come. The Listening Post's Adnan Ahmed now on L'Affaire DSK. In the legal tightrope, French journalists must walk between privacy and the public's right to know.
Dominique Strauss-Kahn's media image was a burnished one. He was a high-flying lawyer, noted economist, the boss of the IMF, and possibly destined for the Elysee Palace. But that media image was shattered the night Strauss-Kahn was arrested on charges of sexual assault. The headlines turned and told a very different story about the man known as DSK.
More and more you've got stories coming out about the fact that he's been a bit promiscuous or trying to seduce women, journalists specifically.
The problem is what was known about Dominique Strauss-Kahn before, or what was his reputation of being a womanizer, a seducer, and that's where I think French journalism may have been at fault of not being interested enough in the allegations that were already circulating about him.
The allegations weren't exactly news to French journalists. DSK's reputation was an open secret in media circles, and some of the allegations against him were serious, like the one made by French journalist Tristan Banon. In 2002, Banon had gone to interview DSK for a book she was writing. She spoke about what had happened on French television.
Avec qui ça s'est très mal passé. Au sol, pas qu'une paire de baffes. On a donné. Enfin, moi, j'ai donné des coups de pied. Il a dégrafé mon soutien-gorge. Il a essayé d'ouvrir mon jean.
Il est obsédé par les gonzesses. Non, mais sérieusement.
The broadcaster bleeped out Strauss-Kahn's name.
Je lui avais parlé quand on se battait. Je lui avais parlé.
Voilà, c'est ça.
Some have said this was French media protecting a powerful political figure. Others argue it was French media and their libel lawyers protecting themselves.
Why would you beep his name on a broadcast? It would be, again, because of libel laws, because you can't accuse someone of attempted rape on TV without any proof. I mean, you can't go around saying, well, my boss or my friend or this guy is a potential rapist. So it's not, just saying, oh, let's pay the fine and name him and shame him. The fact is, with the libel law, you can go until to the closure of a newspaper.
That's because French privacy laws are amongst the strictest and most punitive in Europe. In 1995, France declared the right to privacy to be a constitutional right, and that includes disclosure of a person's private life.
There is a tradition in the French media of ignoring private life issues, and particularly, contrary to Anglo-Saxon journalism, bedroom activities.
The maid told detectives she was starting to clean his hotel room when he began to sexually assault her.
There is a different cultural approach between Anglo-Saxon journalism and French journalism.
On est en France dans un système qui permet aux individus de se défendre et de se protéger.
We feel that what happens in the bedroom between consenting adults is their business.
Under French law, the right to privacy is absolute. Nothing really takes precedence over it. Not a public interest argument, not freedom of expression. Nothing takes precedence over an individual's right to privacy.
Welcome relief for public figures in France, but restrictive for the journalists covering them. In 2007, Jean Quatremer, a correspondent with Libération, a left-leaning French paper, brushed up against the privacy law. He wanted to write a piece about the implications of DSK's behaviour with women, but he knew there was only one way to get the story out, and it was not through his paper.
Une bataille de communication dans cette affaire.
He wrote on his blog that sending Strauss-Kahn to the IMF in an Anglo-Saxon style institution was dangerous because he was known to have a problem with women to the border of harassment. He wrote it on his blog because he knew his editors would not let it published. It made a lot of noise, actually. He got accused by many of his colleagues of having broken a taboo, of having crossed a red line, and he revealed that he came under a lot of pressure from Dominique Strauss-Kahn's aides to unpublish his story, to take it off his blog, which he resisted, and the piece is still online.
Compare the French media environment to the American one, where DSK's arrest was a choreographed media moment. The infamous perp walk is where the arrested suspect, the perpetrator, is paraded so the media can get their money shot.
This is illegal in France. It doesn't happen in France. And it has shocked a lot of French people. There have been a lot of complaints about it.
L'homme accède par une entrée dérobée. La porte claque.
In France, these kinds of events take place in a much more anonymous and discreet way. In the United States, it's freedom of information and freedom of the press, which takes precedence over the right in France to the right to protect your own image.
There's a scandal or controversy over whether the photographs of Dominic Strauss-Kahn after his arrest, unshaven, disheveled, should be published. They say the Americans are almost barbaric, that this is a kind of frontier justice or something, that he should be paraded in this way in front of photographers and cameras.
It was a sharp fall for DSK, a man who moved in powerful circles and who knew how to use his position to mould the coverage he got. From French politics, he went on to head the International Monetary Fund, one of the world's more secretive organisations, and his arrest is prompting questions about why journalists couldn't or wouldn't get closer to the truth.
Getting close to an organisation like the IMF is extremely difficult. I mean, you're in this kind of permanent bind. You've got to keep on good terms with these people in order to keep getting information and getting stories and getting interviews. Like all big international organisations, the IMF has extremely strict rules about talking to the media. And I think journalists have very little leeway when it comes to exploring what goes on inside those institutions.
But one thing that is emerging from this case is a culture shift in French journalism.
The arrest and imprisonment of Dominic Strauss-Kahn has really opened the floodgates. French newspapers are saying things that they wouldn't have said before.
Et le sexe.
Vous parlez d'affaires, vous parlez d'affaires qui vont ressortir.
There is clearly right now a big debate in France and in the French media about should we have reported that or not. That's a debate which is happening right now in my newspaper and in every single newspaper, TV, radio in France.
Because consider if Dominic Strauss-Kahn had not been arrested, had not taken that perp walk. A politician who was known to the media as an alleged danger to women could well have been elected president of France.
More Global Village Voices now on the coverage and treatment of Dominic Strauss-Kahn.
The arrest of Dominic Strauss-Kahn took many journalists by surprise. Although there had been various rumors over the years and stories of his sexual indiscretions, each one, however, was seen as part of a very isolated pattern of behavior. Suddenly, when allegations of an actual crime, sexual assault, took place, all bets were off the table. Once accusations are made by prosecutors and then taken up by the media, it's very difficult to shake.
The coverage in this story really has been quite outrageous and is overwhelmingly detrimental to the victim. It seems to fall into one of two camps, really. One is either that she was asking for it, and the other that it's all a bit of a non-story. It does make you despair, really, in the 21st century about the coverage of stories and the fact that when a young woman makes an allegation, a serious allegation of sexual assault, that this is the way the papers choose to report it.
Finally, every once in a while when we select our web video of the week, we like to go with something that's a little bit dancey. Dubstep is an electronic dance music genre that came out of South London in the late 90s. This video features three guys who go by the names of Nonstop, iGlide, and Glitch. And this is what happens to them when they pick up a stray music player and a set of headphones and get hit with some very loud dubstep. Their moves are almost inhuman. They're already at 750,000 hits on YouTube, and this is the kind of thing that you do want to try at home. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.